David Cleanland.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a short call on behalf of the Greens, primarily simply to affirm our continued support for this bill, which we believe is a step both to restoring the mana of the affected iwi and hapu, acknowledging what was taken away from them, and this will go some way towards restoring what was taken away. It might also lead to some very positive environmental and social outcomes, which will be very positive and far from incidental, but additional benefits from this sort of settlement bill. Just like to preface my comments by echoing my colleague who spoke to the former when this bill was last debated in the House, and regretting the recent loss of Lady Mahuta, who did an extraordinary amount of work for her iwi and indeed for the entire country, specifically in advancing causes like this, like the restoration of the Waikato, the management of it to its rightful owners. We commend, and as a default position, we do support these settlement bills, and it's timely to recall that delay in bringing them to fruition has been a characteristic over many years, and we have seen too many generations of elders of all iwi who have failed to see the benefits, the beneficial outcomes of many of these claims. And we'd urge this, and indeed every government, to adequately or even generously support and resource and facilitate the conclusion of many of the outstanding settlements, all of which have a common aim of settling claims in a proper and a fair and a sustainable manner. We heard in an earlier discussion this afternoon, and it's been stated many times, that New Zealand's natural environment is in a very poor state, an indefensibly poor state, and our economic as well as our cultural, our social and indeed our lifestyles are threatened by the degradation. And the proposed clean-up trust that this bill establishes is to some extent a novel initiative. It's also a long overdue initiative. And the condition of the Waikato, along with many of our rivers, is in an appalling condition. It's little short of a national disgrace, and the sacrifice of the river, the quality of the river water, to the combined demands of farming, of urban development, of waste discharge, excessive extraction, needs to be stopped and indeed reversed. And we see the settlement and the various agencies and practices it will establish as being a very positive step towards doing that. The co-management model that this bill proposes is not common in New Zealand. It is much more common overseas. And I think it's useful for people to understand that co-management means much more than simply having two parties with an opinion, with an ability to influence outcomes. Co-management is quite a sophisticated structure in terms of land and indeed water management. It's an adaptive approach, which is to say you learn by doing. It's adaptive in that you affect changes and you look at the responses, both environmentally and socially, of those changes, and you continue to adapt to the real outcomes. It's not a theoretical approach. It's a very hands-on, grounded approach at the operational level, and that is one of the powers of a co-management approach. It acknowledges the value of scientific input, of, if you like, Western science, but it also acknowledges Indigenous knowledge and has had significant success internationally in incorporating the best of what we call hard or Western science and Indigenous knowledge that's accumulated over many generations, indeed over centuries. It allows for the putting alongside a scientific assessment of water quality alongside a tool like a cultural health index, which informs people in a very rich and positive way about the well-being of that environment in cultural terms. And it puts things in that framework that both sides of a co-management arrangement can actually accept and deal with and move on with. Co-management only works with a very high level and a sustained level of stakeholder engagement. It will fail to the extent that all stakeholders are not engaged and do not feel that they're participating. And we hope that that will lay to rest some of the expressed opposition, some of the concerns of some of the opponents of this bill who continue to see that or to fear that the engagement will be taken away from them. Finally, a co-management approach always obliges the practitioners to look at the detail and also to keep coming out and looking at the bigger picture. So you don't get lost in the small detail, you don't get lost in what's happening on one site, but you're obliged always to come out and have that wider look, to take in that wider concern. So we do really actively and positively support this notion of co-management. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.